Okay, so good evening, everyone from the UK. It's 20 past 7 in the evening, local time. So wherever you are, hello, good day, evening. Um, some big news coming out of the NRL. Two big stories coming out of the NRL, actually. One is the grand final is going to take place in Sydney this year, although post this season, so from 2023 onwards, there is uncertainty uh, the location of the grand final. The NRL may move towards a Super Bowl type format where cities or stadiums bid for the rights to host the NRL grand final. And the relationship between the New South Wales state government and the NRL is at an all-time low. Um, and there is great uncertainty where the grand final will be going to be held from next year onwards. Talks were fraught, and this does involve a lot of funding in regards to suburban stadiums and stadium funding and grassroots funding in New South Wales as well. So this does have a knock-on effect for the rest of the game. If you follow the NRL, if you follow rugby league, there it is a sport that does have issues. Money is one of them, and there was a promise made by the previous New South Wales Prime Minister in regards to stadium funding for stadium redevelopment at several locations in the Greater Sydney and, in fact, throughout New South Wales. And there's only one NRL club that actually owns their own stadium, and that is the Cronulla Sharks. And they're currently their stadium and their leagues club is currently going through a major redevelopment. It isn't quite finished, but they're playing back at home. All the other NRL clubs lease their stadiums, and that is fact. Most of the stadiums used by the NRL are publicly owned by local city council. Doesn't matter where you are, Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria, Capital Territory, and so it does require public money to invest in them, and this puts the NRL at a disadvantage. Now, obviously, Australia's had to deal with obviously the bushfires a few years ago, and of course, real bad flooding in the last couple of years as well, including most recently this year. There's been a spate of devastating floods in New South Wales and Queensland, and the current New South Wales Prime Minister has diverted more funds that were earmarked for stadium and community redevelopment in New South Wales into flood relief programs, which we think would be more of a federal policy, but the state government has contributed some of their budget to ongoing flood relief. Now, Peter V'landys, whether you love him or hate him, he is a divisive figure, was very instrumental in getting the sport up and running in 2020. Same as Gil McLaughlin in the AFL, and he's standing down at the end of this season as well. So both these leagues and organisations are in a state of flux. But Peter V'landys and Andrew Abdo, who's the current NRL CEO, who replaced Todd Greenberg during the shutdown of play in 2020, the talks were fraught and the situation is tense. So the NRL is in a bit of a pickle with New South Wales state government, and as I say, the grand final may not be played in Sydney next year. It may revert to a sort of Super Bowl style format. And a lot of fans, even Queenslanders, aren't necessarily. A lot of Queenslanders want to keep the grand final in Sydney, for what that's worth. Now, Brisbane did a very good job last year because of COVID, and it was a fantastic grand final, and there is no disputing that. And I watched it live on the internet, and it was, as I say, fantastic grand final. But the NRL is looking at all options for where to host the grand final. The big issue is, stadium funding for stadium redevelopment, considering that currently 15 out of the 16 teams do not own the stadiums they play in. I think with Redcliffe joining, I think Redcliffe do own their stadium. It isn't publicly owned. So from next year, it'll be 2 out of 17 teams own their own stadiums. But as things currently stand, only one team in the NRL own their home ground, which is Cronulla. And therefore, the power is currently with the New South Wales state government. They can restrict or reduce funding or pull the funding altogether, and there's not a lot the NRL can really do. Yes, contracts have been signed, but we've seen how easily contracts can be amended, broken, breached. The NRL has another headache coming out this week. Now, with the allegations of impropriety against Kurt Mann and Kalyn Ponga, the Newcastle Knights players, in regards to the incident in that nightclub last weekend, where it's inferred that there may have been illicit drug use. The Rugby League Players Association, which is the players' union, are threatening to withdraw from targeted drug testing for narcotics, in regards to the fact that both Kalyn Ponga, the Newcastle Knights captain, and Kurt Mann, who's one of the senior players at the club as well, were named in the press as going to be tested. Now, normally when a targeted test or any test takes place, it is anonymous, and there's the 3 strikes policy. And it was known earlier in the week the players were going to be tested. Now, we won't know if they've necessarily failed that test unless they get the second strike, which is a 12-game suspension, or a third strike, which would be a very lengthy ban, depending on NRL protocols. Now, I will be doing a video into the culture within the NRL, from what I see on the outside looking in as a British fan. So I don't live in Australia, so I can't comment on the social ills that Australia faces, especially with the gang wars in Sydney, although I have read up and watched documentaries on the current situation in Western Sydney, or southwestern Sydney, or Greater Western Sydney, with all the street gangs and organised crime figures killing each other, and then the ongoing turf issues in relations to the underworld, the underbelly side of things, very similar to what Melbourne went through about a decade and a half ago. And this pops up. Now, with what the Players Association is threatening to do, which is to withdraw from or refuse to agree to targeted testing, that is a big statement. But what I find interesting is another player was targeted testing for, in his case, steroid use, and that was Bronson Xerri, Cronulla Shark centre, who was found in a doping violation. Found guilty of a doping violation. That was also a targeted test. I didn't see the RLPA kicking up a fuss 2.5 years ago when he was targeted tested, when there was evidence circulating of him, using performance-enhancing drugs for a significant period of time. Now, it's all swings and roundabouts, but that is some big news in that regard. In what regards to Elon Musk, what tweets Elon Musk done now? I've heard a lot of things about Elon Musk, and some of the tweets he's been posting. Is this in regards to the automated, fully automated robotics and us never having jobs ever again? It's Elon Musk. I find the guy unsufferable. I'm not a fan of Elon Musk, and it's not sport related, so I couldn't give a tinker's cuss what the Bond villain wants to do. Same with Mark. Oh God, look, everyone's coming out. He said he was going to buy Twitter, and he didn't. To be brutally honest, I take anything that Elon Musk has to say with a massive pinch of salt, and I can't stand the guy. In my opinion, he's a frigging Bond villain. And same with Jeff Bezos, same with Mark Zuckerberg. I would prefer it if they had nothing to do with sport. However, Jeff Bezos and his Amazon Prime have rights to our rugby union autumn internationals. The crap Premier League games over Boxing Day that no one really wants to watch anyway, because we're all too busy recovering from Christmas Day. And the only one who hasn't actively done anything in regards to sport or been linked to sport anyway is Zuckerberg, who also comes across as they're all Bond villains basically. Just watch a James Bond film; they're the archetypal, entitled middle class white Bond villain. Not very diverse there. The fact that Man United, look, he's just doing it for effect, really. There's a lot of people coming forward to say they're interested in buying Man United. I mean, Casemiro has now been linked to a move to Man United. I mean, the De Jong situation's farcical. Man United, I think the funny thing is Jeff Bezos, Zuckerberg, and Elon Musk, three of the richest men in the world. If they were to buy Man United, they could quite easily pay off the debts that the club has piece of piece. And if you were the owner of Man United or any other football, any other sports team, you'd be mad not to go free cash. Um, I don't take anything that Elon Musk says with any seriousness. To be fair, I think the guy is a megalomaniac and a Bond villain. Same with Zuckerberg, and same with Jeff Bezos. Like, you know, they could contribute to end world hunger and donate so much money to end climate change. Yeah, one of the fuckers went to space in a penis-shaped rocket. Um, One of the fuckers wants to replace all working people with robots, and the other fucker wants to steal all our information. So they really are the three cunts. They're everything that is wrong with society summed up. You know, generally, I can't stand any of them. And because of Zuckerberg and social media, and could argue Elon Musk as well, being interested in buying Twitter, and then claiming he was going to buy Twitter. So Radcliffe, I have a clue about him either. I think he was involved with Carlisle United. I know he's been involved in football and other sports before. I don't know much about the man, if I'm being honest. But at this point in time, a lot of these individuals, like Jeff Bezos, who's destroyed independent booksellers and independent, DVD stores and things like that, and Zuckerberg, who's stolen all our data and sold it to dodgy companies, and Elon Musk, who claims Tesla's one of the greatest car companies, yet in 5 years your car is worthless because to replace the battery costs more than what the car pays. Yeah. Yeah. Well, look, man, the Man City Group own a multitude of clubs. I believe, I think he's the Ineos owner. I think he's the guy who owns Ineos. Um, so he is involved with cycling, and there's all sorts of rumours going about what was Team Sky, which is now Ineos Grenadiers, about some of their nutrition programs. There's some rather. There's always where there's smoke, there's fire. Yeah, they've been basically accused of breaching the TUE therapeutic exemption rules and a fair bit of doping. So if it's the guy who owns Nissan Lausanne, he's the guy who owns Ineos Grenadiers, the cycling team that was formerly Team Sky. And I'm not a big fan of him either. He's Britain's richest man, by the way, so he can afford to buy out the Glazers and pay off the debt and still be worth around 750 million to 800 million or something. He's Britain's wealthiest man. Other than the Grosvenor family, he's like the first or second richest man in the country. He can afford to pay off the debt and buy out the Glazers. Because the Glazers will overvalue Man United. He can afford to buy that. Thoughts on Americanised money at clubs. I watched 5 Points vids, and yeah, there's a reason why American owners are so shit. Watch his video on 10 teams that are going to be moved anytime soon, which is one of his recent videos. It makes me glad that there's not as many American owners in the European game, because my God, American sports ownership is shambolic. Absolutely shambolic. It's almost farcical. And look, if the Fenway Sports Group is the best that the Americans have to offer in ownership, and they're not great owners. So, and when everyone at Liverpool fans say, well, they got us the Champions League back, they got us the Premier League title. Yeah, no, they abused the furlough scheme because they claimed they couldn't afford to pay. They didn't want to pay all their staff. They wanted the British government to pay their staff. They were trying to set up, the European Super League. They want to plan to shrink the Premier League to suit their interests. Yeah, no, the Fenway Sports Group are the least grotty of the American owners. Look what's happened to Burnley. Look what's happened to Man United. the attempt to buy Derby, the guy who now owns Chelsea, he's not particularly popular in the US Dodgers fan base. Let that sink in. Yeah, no, if the Fenway Sports Group is the least detested, I think it's the best way to look at it, um, of the American owners we have in well, there's I think there's American owner owns one of the Dundee clubs. So there's a few other clubs with American investment. But if they are the least detested, um, then let that sink in because I don't have a lot of time. Uh, don't get me wrong, I love some American sports teams, and the majority of the NHL plays in the US. I like Major League Rugby, but look at some of the owners; they are absolutely well, quite frankly, they're dreadful. They really are diabolical. Just look at some of the issues some of the American teams in like Major League Baseball, the NBA, the NHL, um, some of the NFL owners are just cuckoo. Some of the NBA owners are diabolical. Some of the Major League Baseball owners are just sleazy, and some of the NHL owners don't have a clue. They really are shocking. That's my view on it. I'm not a massive fan of the American money that's coming. I'm not a really fan of a lot of foreign money that's coming to the game. There's too much globalization. The average fan is being priced out. Um, they're treated more like corporate clubs than sporting clubs. It's all about the merchandise sales. The fan day experience is they try and milk it for. I mean, look at the price of some of the replica kits. I mean, just not it's not sustainable. Have there been any football clubs which relegated at some point in time that really shocked you? Oh, when Leicester first got relegated from the Premier League, I think back in I think was it 2002. That was a bit shocking. Nottingham Forest, Coventry City. I think Nottingham Forest is the real big one, considering that they had won the European Cup in back-to-back seasons a decade and a half before. And they were the first club to lift what is now the Champions League and be relegated from their top division. In fact, end up playing in the third tier of English football. That would be the biggest shock when it comes to relegation. Um, but I would say Oldham finally getting relegated out of the Football League, so they're the first founding Premier League club, 92, to end up in that situation. Um, but other than that, nothing overly shocking. I think in my lifetime, I think the most shocking one is Nottingham Forest, and to a certain extent Blackburn, the first Premier League winner to get relegated out of the Premier League after winning the trophy. But something like an Everton or a Man United would send massive shockwaves, I think, um, through football. But I think the last time Everton played in second division, the year they were relegated was the year Queen Elizabeth was proclaimed monarch, and the year they were promoted back, I think, was the year she was crowned. So that's how long Everton have been in the top flight. They've been in the top flight since the early 50s. They've only spent a couple of seasons outside the top flight of the Football League. In fact, they've never been relegated from the Football League, and they've never been outside the top two divisions. So Everton have got the longest time spent in the top flight. Um, they've never been below the second tier since multiple divisions were instituted in the Football League. So before more than two divisions, they were always in the top flight. So before World War Two, there were only two divisions just after the Second World War, and then they added more clubs. So if Everton were to go down, historically that would be the biggest relegation out of football relegations. If Man United were to go and get relegated, I mean, look, they've been outside the top flight in their history. People forget that, and they weren't a founder club of the Football League. So they were Newton Heath, the Football Alliance club, before they changed name and moved to Old Trafford in Salford, and changed their colours and their crest from the green and yellow. So basically, the Norwich colours to the Red Devils. Um, that would be one of the biggest ones as well, if not the biggest. So either Everton or Man United getting relegated this season, which on current form looks bloody likely because United's away form, they've lost the last seven. I think it's the last 7 away games they've lost in a row. So I don't think they've won an away game this year, sorry. So that's in January. There was a lot of draws in there. I think they were two big. If that was to happen this season, I think they would be possibly the biggest of all time. Yes, both those clubs have been outside the top flight before I was born. Um, I It's a difficult one because I could say Hamburg in German football. They got relegated out the Bundesliga top flight a couple of years back. Schalke, another one. There's been some clubs in German football as well who are of a similar size and standing in the game in Germany. PSG have been relegated out the top flight in France more than once. So it's a difficult one. But I would say, if any, I mean, I think Hamburg would probably be the big one in my lifetime, would be Hamburg in Germany. And that's a big one because they have won European trophies. They are the second club. River Plate, and then their fans decided to destroy Buenos Aires for 48 hours. And Boca Junior fans laughed their heads off and then had to defend their homes and shops from being destroyed. But no, there's been some big ones. I would say now Nottingham Forest and Hamburg are the first two clubs to be relegated for what happens on the field, who won what is now the Champions League. Juventus were thrown out for match fixing. They weren't relegated on the field, they were relegated for stuff off the field. So 3 clubs that have won what is now the Champions League have played in the lower divisions of their respective league systems. Every other club that has lifted what was the European Cup, which is now the Champions League, has not been relegated from their top flight. So that's an interesting one. But I would say, River Plate, Nottingham Forest, and Hamburg, I think, are the biggest ones to happen in my lifetime. I think the one that probably sent the most shockwaves around, I don't know really, because the impact that those 3 clubs have had on their respective league systems, their respective footballing cultures, how dominant they were at times in their history. And Nottingham Forest, their dominance was a very short spell in comparison to other clubs, but their most successful spell was Brian Clough's time as manager. Outside of that, they hadn't won a lot of silverware. Just sums up the situation. But I think I don't know. Richest British born or richest who lives here. The Grosvenors, the Duke of Westminster, who's the Grosvenor family. He's I think a year younger than me. He inherited a property empire. And the guy who owns Ineos made his money in the petroleum industry and plastics. They're both wealthy individuals. One property, one resource management. I think it's a good way to look at it. One inherited the family business, one built his business from scratch. But they're both living. They're both UK residents. They both pay taxes. So there you go, which is kind of nice. But they're not overly desirable individuals. The price of replica kits is pretty obscene. I haven't bought any new sports kits for 4 years. The last new ones I got were my ice hockey jerseys, and that was 4 years ago, in 2018. So it's been 4 years since I purchased a sporting replica of anything, and that was 60 quid. And that's an ice hockey jersey, which I think is a fairly reasonable price for a match replica. got authentics as well. And I had one with fight straps, nice off the jersey with fight straps. Actually, it's technically it is actually a match worn one, but I don't know where it's frigging gone these days. Oh yeah, I forgot about Leeds getting relegated. I remember the season they did go down; it was fantastic. Um, but they had gone off the boil very very quickly from a Champions League semi-final to the situation they found themselves in. Atletico Madrid again just underperforming on the field for a significant period of time, and a slow, steady decline, and then it went off the cliff. St Etienne this season in France, and the scenes at the match when they got relegated, they already had a third of their stadium, a quarter of their stadium shut down. They had one of their stands closed because they'd already had so many breach notices from UEFA for fan behaviour. They were playing in a partially closed stadium anyway. So St Etienne's another big one. There have been some big relegations. Yeah, I did forget about Leeds and St Etienne, which just. But yeah, there's been some big ones. PSG's been relegated in my lifetime from the top flight in France, I think twice. There have been some ups and downs, um, yeah, across the leagues. No club is immune from relegation. I don't think no club is too big to fail. Although clubs like Barcelona claim they are, look at the state they're in. No, they're not too big to fail. And someone needs to be held accountable for the situation some of these clubs find themselves in. And no one's taking responsibility for bad decisions made or the financial black holes these clubs find themselves in. I mean, look at my history video on Portsmouth. No one was ever they had a fraud trial over it, but no one actually had a prosecution. Yeah, 2000, the year that Spanish football was normal. And when I say normal, like competitive. 22 years ago is a long time. That's 22, 23 seasons ago, something like that. That's when Spanish football was played on a level playing field financially. Those days are long gone. And you fast forward, 2 and a bit decades, the financial state of Spanish football is unsustainable. And a lot of the blame obviously has to lie with the clubs. You've got to look at UEFA as well, La Liga, the Spanish FA, and the mess that has been allowed to fester is a good way of describing the situation within the Spanish game. The culture that has been allowed to brew, if that's a good way, if that's a good wording, over a significant period of time, has led to Barcelona and Real Madrid, believing they're bigger than the game, that the game owes them rather than they owe the game their existence. Where Barcelona found any of the money to sign players is beyond me, and where they're finding the money for the stadium redevelopment again is beyond me. And the culture within Spanish football is just as toxic, if not worse, than the culture in English football, in my opinion. I think the league system with the best off-field culture is actually Germany. There is no, in my opinion, we may go Bayern dominant league. That's fine, but it's the off-field culture and how the clubs are run. In my opinion, German football is hands above the rest, streets ahead of the rest of us. And the fans have a bigger say in the running of their clubs than apart from I think 4 clubs in Spain that elect presidents. No, in German football, apart from I think 2 clubs, which are RB Leipzig and Arminia Bielefeld, I believe. No, it's Is it Hoffenheim or Bielefeld, which is the club that everyone hates? I think it's Hoffenheim. Hoffenheim and RB Leipzig fans own a 50% plus 1 extra vote share of their club. ticket prices. I can go to a Dortmund game for 17 to 25 euros for a decent ticket. A Dortmund game. Now that's my favourite German club. Not going to, you know, hide my bias there. If I can go to a Dortmund game for 25 euro, and that's your upper end ticket price normally, you know, let that sink in. That's your average ticket price, home or away. Cost of 2 tickets at the cinema plus popcorn. Cheap to go to a Dortmund game. And the scary thing is, if I want to go see Blackburn play, or even go to a Premier League game or another Championship game, excluding Reading, because Reading's my local club, which is I walk there and therefore will not use any public transport. That doesn't even cover my pissing train ticket to get to Brentford. Let that sink in. Cost to watch a game in Dortmund, and including flight and train fare and taxi, is about, I would say, £45. I could, in theory, go to see a Dortmund game. And I could be home before midnight. Excluding, that's on the German travel side. British travel side, the taxi from Heathrow Airport or Gatwick Airport, or the train ticket, would be more than the ticket to watch Dortmund play. Let that sink in. So the pricing of tickets in Germany is streets ahead of where we are. We've seen fan protests about the cost. And then that whole European Super League debacle. The failure to get the 2 biggest German clubs on side, the 2 most successful German clubs on side, who won the Champions League between them multiple times, in Dortmund and Bayern Munich, was the beginning of the end. Before the fan protest, the failure to get 2 most successful German sides on side involved in the European Super League was the real reason it was killed, not the fan protests. That undid it. As soon as the fan protest gained a bit of momentum, as soon as Dortmund and Munich said, "Now we're not interested," then the fan protests really gained momentum and really stuffed it. But that was the turning point. The fact that 12 clubs had the cheek to believe they were bigger than the sport that made them. It's pretty much like Ronaldo right now at Man United. Without football, he's just an ugly guy from Madeira who's had a bit of plastic surgery and his teeth done. He's just a playboy from Madeira. Football is what makes Ronaldo. He'll be a poor peasant boy from outlying Portuguese island. I think the problem we are seeing is the players are definitely overpaid. The clubs, well, the club chairman, club owners, boards, they're pretty greedy. And more often than not, clubs are badly run because they've had all this TV money, they've had all these gate receipts, the merchandise sales, the all this money, more money than they could ever spend. Yet most clubs are racked with debt. It's ridiculous. It is ridiculous. Yet the football clubs are resisting a UEFA-wide salary cap system, which is to be enforced by all clubs. Because while La Liga does have a salary cap system, it's a very, very soft cap. It's not a true salary cap based upon revenues. So Barcelona and Real Madrid, it's a license to print money. The fact that they are well over their cap, just let that sink in. Although Barcelona have been a bit better at managing their salaries than Barcelona by a significant amount. But let this sink in, okay? So the Australian dollar, the euro, and the pound are basically at the same level at the moment. About 30 pence difference in real. There's about 30 cents on the US dollar's difference between the Australian dollar and the euro and the pound. Not a lot of difference on the exchange rate. So these currencies are basically roughly within a 50 cents on the dollar range. There's not a lot of difference. It used to be $3 to the Australian dollars to the pound, but now it's 1.5 Australian dollars to the pound at the moment, roughly. I think about 1.3 at one point. So it's halved in value. They're nearly equal, right? where they were. It's 50%. It's 50% cheaper to get Aussie dollars now. Um, yeah, their cost of living is less. So that's it. The top played Australian rugby league player, who I believe they're one of their top paid athletes, is on I think it's 1.25 million Australian dollars a year before tax a year. De Jong at Barcelona, in theory, earns that in 3.5 weeks. So a yearly salary for a top paid NRL player in Australia is about equivalent to 3 weeks' salary of Barcelona's top paid player. Just let that sink in. People wonder why Barcelona have got over a 1.3 billion in debt, and are trying to get around capital gains tax in Spain by setting up a dummy third-party company for their media rights, which is basically they're selling their media rights back to themselves. It's a fraud. Just let that sink in. That's where football's gone wrong. There's too much money in the system, and it's not actually the players' fault that they're getting overpaid. They've got very good agents. It's the clubs themselves who got greedy and are willing to pay well over the market rate, which overinflates the wage, which then impacts on the ticket price, which at the end of the day prices out the average fan. Then you got the TV money. We were always told that the satellite TV money, the TV rights especially, would keep ticket prices down. That was the biggest lie. We were sold the lie that TV money and the 3 o'clock blackout will protect attendances and keep ticket prices down. So why is it then that the League Cup and some rounds of the FA Cup have really shit attendance? Why is it then that ticket prices are obscene? And why is it then that so many clubs are in financial difficulty with all this TV money? Billions a year TV deal. Yet, you know, a percentage of the Premier League clubs are resisting the fan-led review, the 50-point fan-led review, resisting it. They are resisting an independent governance body, separate of the Premier League, Football League, and the FA. Resisting. It's for their own good, because self-governance clearly can't work. They tried and failed to block the Newcastle takeover, because apparently that's unfair to football, Newcastle having money, but they're okay with Man City having unlimited wealth, or at one point Chelsea. But Newcastle maybe can't have that. No. Apparently make it harder to get in the top six, according to one chief exec. I think Man United aren't getting the top six anyway. I think Tottenham are going to have another trophy this season, and Arsenal will still be rebuilding for next year. So just just let that sink in. One of the chief executives of one of the big six said it'd be harder to get into the top six because Newcastle having money. I think that was a Man United chief exec. I'm not sure if they've seen the league table right now. They're bottom, got no points and the worst goal difference. It was either Man United or Everton. One of their chief executives basically came out and said it makes it harder to make the European places. I don't think the Everton chief executive saw how they played last season, but they narrowly avoided relegation. Man United, right now with their recent away form, that's relegation form, ironically. So I don't know what these guys have been smoking, but I'll have what they're having. It's probably crap, to be fair. They're delusional. So yeah, my cynicism this evening is born out of a lengthy period of really giving up on football. Because Man United, a club with 600 million of debt, by the way, leverage takeover, of course, are now wanting to pay over the odds for Casemiro. And they want to pay how much for De Jong? And they paid how much for Harry Maguire? This Man United, the owners, right? Well, when I say Glazers, what I mean is they bought the club with other people's money, so they technically don't own Man United. Other people do via the Glazers via debt. That's in key. That's what a leverage takeover is, which should be illegal. And if that was in business, a business watchdog will go no. And the FA and the Premier League said we brought in the directors' test to stop these leverage takeovers, yet they allowed it to happen to Burnley because Burnley aren't important. Let that sink in, please. The EFL didn't allow Derby County to go bust because guess what? They actually played games this season that would ruin the league table. And we can't have that because Bury didn't play games in 2019, so they allowed them to go bust. Which, when the Accrington Stanley owner came out and said that's just cost us £250,000 for those 2 games. Imagine if Everton or Man United were to go bust, how much money, millions that would cost clubs. This is where football's all wrong. Clubs like Man United will never be allowed to fail by the governing body because the Football League would love Man United to get relegated into the league, the Championship. Love it. Absolutely love it because the commercial possibilities, they want Man United and Everton to get relegated, ironically. It's actually good for their product. Bad for the Premier League, but good for the football. The Premier League doesn't want Man United to fail. They don't want them to get relegated. Bad for their product. So there's competing, it's all about marketing. And it's just Man City is just a corporate club as well. It just so happens that they're quite good at playing football. Liverpool. If Fenway Sports Group fail at Liverpool financially, they don't deserve to be sports owners. So that's thinking. They're very good at being sports owners. They're the least undesirable of the American owners. The least undesirable. Personally, I wouldn't want Fenway Sports Group to own Blackburn. That's a personal preference. I do want the Venkies to own Blackburn, but they've stopped fiddling with the club now and they just let it run itself. And guess what? We're doing quite well. Although we lost to Reading the other night 3-0. How, I don't know, but Reading, so someone has to lose them eventually. Happen. You can tell I'm in a bit more of a cynical mood. And it's born out of every time I read a sports headline, it's, well, there's no positive stories basically when I read a sports headline at the moment. No. Because when I look at the transfer gossip and what bids have been put in for transfer fees, it's an obscene amount of money, especially at a time when I can't even afford to feed myself properly. Let that sink in. My pay rise wasn't a pay rise. Technically a pay cut. 40p an hour better off. 30p an hour better off, yeah. Technically, for going by living wage, it's still starvation wage. Yeah, I'm seeing some of these transfer fees paid, some of the wages paid, and I've just lost football. I'll watch the internationals and I'll cover World Cups and things like that. Sure. I'll do my club histories because looking back to the old days, that's when like a weekly salary was a yearly salary. Right? Happy. Right? Yeah. The year I was born, the average weekly salary in the Premier League was the average annual salary for a top flight player. Yeah, let that sink in. So yeah, the money is obscene. And there's a reason why I'm not a fan of Sky Sports. There's a reason why I'm not a fan of BT Sport. And I don't hold back in my criticism of those broadcasters. Not really a fan of BBC to be fair, or ITV because I think they've gone a bit lefty loony. They've become a bit biased in their broadcasting, the way to describe it. And the quality of the punditry and the quality of the broadcasting, I do think, has very noticeably gone downhill. So I'm not holding my cynicism of that. Yeah, so my at the moment when I look at sport, I don't see a lot of positives at all. Um, Tomorrow there is some positive. I'm a big fan of women's rugby, both league and union, and the NRLW kicks off tomorrow. So I'm looking forward to that. That is a positive. They've expanded the competition from next year to 10 teams. They've sped up the expansion process, partly in result to how the delayed 2021 season went, record viewership numbers, record crowd figures, and a massive increase of participation and viewership as a result, and more money in the game. So the women's game has exploded in Australia. Rugby league, fantastic. So they were initially going to expand to 8 teams next year. They've spread that up to 10. So that's good, right? That's a positive story. I have for me. But every time outside of watching the games that I watch, I look at headlines. They're not good. They're not positive. Um, we've got allegations of well, definitely, stupidity from a couple of the Newcastle Knights players, including Caleb Pong and Kurt Mann, Bradman Best, Tuwala. Two players have been dropped, and two players are facing possible suspensions if they fail their drugs test. And that's one of my favourite sports. That ain't good. Yeah, I did. I did. I mean, look, this is 10 years ago, he's worth £1 million. The transfer market is massively overinflated. And then look at, the cost of living crisis that the average fan, us, is going through. It is kind of obscene, and I think professional sport and certain sports, not all, are increasingly out of touch with their fan bases and what, how, for a better word, you know, it is your consumer base. And, you know, we've seen low attendances at the League Cup games, midweek games last week. I think it was one of my work colleagues went to see the Reading Blackburn game because he's a Reading fan. And he went, yeah, attendance was half full stadium. So there you go. Historically, what's the highest scoring league out of the top five in European top? Would not actually know unless I actually delve into the goals per season stats. Now, bearing in mind, not all the leagues are the same size. And historically, the British top flight used to be, I think was it 22 or 24? I think it was 24 at one point. Then it became 22, and they've restructured the top flight multiple times in the history of the English game and the Scottish game, and France, and Germany, and Spain. So league sizes have varied on the size of the league, and the Italian league. The Italian league is historically one of the lower out of the big, more famous European leagues that get a lot of attention in the US. The Italian league is historically famed for its more defensive style and lower goals per game average. Um, the 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 Spanish league is more famed for some of the blowout, unbalanced scores. I would probably say the English or German leagues probably because you get more balanced scoring, but you can get higher scoring games, but more balanced and less goalless draws. Um, but I'll have to look at goals per game average. But over time, it has varied, very similar to the NHL, um, or points per game average if you want to look at the NFL and the NBA, for example. Um, Look, I did. A work colleague of mine did show me every season of the Premier League the goal scoring, goals per game average, and it's varied between 2.5 and I think 2.9. It's never been below 2. I think the lowest it was 2.1, and the highest it's been is 3.1. But the average is generally speaking, there's been I think two unique seasons where one was really high and one was really low. It's never dropped below 2. I don't think it's ever got as high as I think it got as high as 3.1 once, but for the most part, it stays at a pretty even 2.5 to 2.8 goals per game average. Um, in regards to if we're looking at goals per game average, that's historically English football over the last 30 years has generally, for the most part, stayed between 2.5 and 2.8. I think it averages out over a 30-year period, I think 2.6 goals per game average, if you round up or round down. I can't remember. Basically, we looked at the last 30 years of the English game, and we basically worked out um, goals per game average has stayed pretty consistent within a narrow band. It hasn't fluctuated as much as we anticipated. Let's just say that we expected it to be higher when defence, when basically the game was a bit more open because defences were less well organised, players were less fit. Turns out, it stayed pretty consistent over a lengthy period, which I found really surprising. Um, Italy is known to be more defensive-minded league, so their goals per game average is lower. I think it's around 1.9 average, so it's a good zero point 0.6 goals per game lower, but it's still more than a goal a game. And you're less likely to get blowout scores in Italian football. They're more likely to be closer, more nil-nils, more 1-0s, more 2-1s. English football, more 3-2s than 2-1s, so therefore the goals per game average goes up a little bit. Um, I think the opening day of the Premier League in '92, there was not a single goalless draw, if I remember correctly. I've got it on my phone somewhere. I shared a snapshot of the opening weekend of the 1992-93 season. I don't think there was a goalless game that match day weekend. Well, I could be mistaken. The Dutch league, yes, historically, yes, was stronger than the French and has been for the most part of its history. Although the UEFA coefficient does impact, with they also take into account the national sides winning as well as the domestic leagues. And while Dutch sides have obviously won the European Cup, problem is French clubs have been in the final more recently, and more French clubs have got to the latter stages of European competitions more so than the Dutch more recently. Um, and the UEFA coefficient really skews the strength of league. Is the game better when scoring's up? I don't really know. As I say, English football for the most part has stayed pretty consistent with the goals per game average. It hasn't varied as much it hasn't varied really at all in my lifetime. From the foundation of the Premier League till now, it hasn't really fluctuated dangerously, and I do honestly mean that. So I do, I do like high scoring games. I'm not one of these who needs to have like the perfect ultimate team where it's literally, you know, I don't like players being overcoached, which unfortunately I think is happening too much in the modern game. As players are having their flair and their skill and their emotion coached out. They are becoming robotic. Um, I like the game to be at a fast pace. I like it to be end to end, which is generally quite entertaining and quite open. And that could mean a lower league game. It honestly could. I really enjoyed the Women's Euros, which is a lower quality because they're not as fit, they're not as well coached. Um, and therefore it does make the game more open and actually ironically more exciting, especially when there's a lot of mistakes, defensive errors. You don't know what's going to happen next. And because it's a bit more end to end and a bit more frantic, ironically, it's more entertaining. I like the South American style for example. I like watching the MLS because it's not as a higher standard of fitness and organisation, which is where they're overcoached. Sometimes step back a bit less coaching, a bit more just we'll set up in this formation, just play. Only coach the set plays and defensively. If you just allow the attacking players to play what's in front of them and use their footballing intelligence, find the space, make the pass, make the move, make the off the ball run. Ironically, you actually attack better. If you coach an attack saying you've got to go this way, it's got to go this way, then he's got to cross it in, and then I expect you to be here, but on the dot. No, it's all. I like instinctive attacking where the creative players see the space, player in space makes the call, or the creative player makes a signal. That is the ultimate when you have that freedom of expression. I think that's been coached out of players. Um, and yeah, absolutely. Coach set plays, coach defense. Absolutely. I think that's where you've got to focus. When it comes to attack, let it be a bit more free flowing. Don't overcoach it. Okay, you might want to coach a few combinations and a few call signs for crossfield passing triangle. You want to have a few codes for that. But for the most part, just let the attacking creative players play what's in front of them off the cuff. That is sometimes the best goals are scored by just starting a move, by allowing a player to play what's in front of them, make a destructive run, which creates space for another player who may have a rocket or a long range shot, or may be in a good space in the box. And that's how the best goals are scored. That that relationship where you've made that combination on the training field and just unleash some of. I like the unstructured, fast-paced attack. Um, Thoughts on Dele Alli to Besiktas? His career's gone down the toilet. Not that he was very good to begin with. Not gonna lie, never been a fan of Dele Alli. His attitude sometimes, well, he does. His attitude stinks basically. Overrated. Decent player, not as good as he thought he was. And for me, that's his England career done. I don't think he comes back to the Premier League. I think he's now going to be a journeyman player. He's got himself to blame with his attitude at times. And yeah, he 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 didn't hit the ceiling that was expected. His upper ceiling of development was a lot lower than what was anticipated when Spurs got him from MK Dons. They expected that they had this rapidly developing player, and he plateaued so early, and never consistent. Well, he's an ex-Tottenham player, so not consistent at all. And yeah, so I was never yeah. I think his attitude wasn't quite right. But anyway, um, no, I've enjoyed watching MLS in the past. I've been to Premier League games. I can assure you now. No, I don't know what games you're watching, but every Premier League game I've ever been to has been shit. Quite frankly, I prefer the lower league games. They're they're far more enjoyable. Every Premier League game I've gone to since 1996 has been a shower of shite, and I'm not holding back on that criticism. The highlights package gives you a false representation of what actually happens on the field because it skips out the 85 minutes of crap. You might get 5 minutes of actual decent play. Premier League is overrated. I've been going to football for the best part of 26 years. Yeah, uh, I've been going to cup games, lower division games, youth cup games, pre-season friendlies, non-league games. Um, I was going for the well, what was Division One, which is now the Championship, before it got stupidly rebranded the Championship. Ugh, clueless rebranding. I don't get the League One and League Two football league either. But yeah, yeah, that's because there was no one else to fill the position that he played, and the combination he played with other younger players, with Jermaine Defoe. Yeah, he prolonged his career by going to Canada and Scotland, admittedly with a short stop off in Bournemouth. He did prolong his career and got a handsome paycheck for it, although his time at Toronto didn't work as well as people realise. It was a bit of a misadventure. But yeah, he prolonged his career and made some extra money out of it. And I don't disagree that Jermaine Defoe is a lovely human being and was a hard working player, but he became a journeyman. Again, if you actually sit down and actually go to a game, 9 out of 10 games are crap. Um, and I've been to enough football to go. I prefer lower league. I prefer cup games, and I prefer non-league. Um, too many Premier League games aren't as fast paced as you think, which shows you how really bad some of the other leagues are when it comes to pacing. Which is why I was pleasantly surprised with how open the Euros were last year, how open the women's Euros were, and the women are forging their own identity with the sport. They really are, and their style of play is completely different. And I really hope the women's game stays as it's been played and developing now. Same with women's rugby league, women's rugby union. If they start copying the men's game, they just fuck themselves, in my opinion. Um, but no, I, I, I prefer international football because that is the best available talent. But I think players are overcoached to the point where, in an attacking position, a player doesn't play what's in front of him. He's been played what he's been told, which is pass left, pass right, chip, hold the ball up, rather than going, there's a player in space over there. But I'm going to give the no look pass. Or I can see a gap there. They go, right, you must pass the winger in this position on the edge of the 18-yard box. Rather than, there's a guy in space, no, you must pass them. Or in Dele Alli's case, I think there's a lot of attitude problem, and the way he left Tottenham and the way his career tailed off at Tottenham, he has been suspended a fair bit. He has a few red cards in his career. Fitness has been an issue since he was about 22, 23. And then you have to question his attitude in getting his fitness right in on the training grounds, in the gym, in the recovery session. You know, what is he like away from the game? Like, you know, what's his habits like? Is he partying too hard? You know, for the amount of money some of these guys are paid, you want to wrap them in cotton wool. But a lot of them do have a bad attitude. A lot of them feel entitled to what they are. You know, they expect to get big wages. It's a privilege, not a right, to be a professional athlete. A lot of them have got that by the age of 16, 17. They're already expecting to get a massive payday, and they can't cope with the fact that they get released from their youth contracts, or they don't break the first team regularly. They can't cope with rejection because they've been told you're going to be a superstar from the age of 11. So their attitude stinks. They've got an attitude of entitlement and privilege. They don't live in the real world, and very few of them actually come across as decent human beings. A lot of it's cameras, by the way. You know, when they sign the autographs and all that. And they do their charity work. The cameras have to be there. Remember that they have to get their Instagram posts up. They they don't actually live in the real world. I've met enough celebrities to work out they are a real shitty breed of people, and a lot of them are sports stars. They don't come across very well, and unfortunately, a lot of them aren't too intelligent either. Um, they're rude. Um, they don't have that same. If you go back 30, 40 years, sometimes 20, depending on the sport, if you were in the junior grades or the junior levels or in a reserve team, you also had to actually have a day job. You had to learn a skill, learn a trade. Even if it was, meant you were a school PE teacher, um, or working in the club shop, or working in a local gym, or even learning to. I mean, Stuart Pearce, for example, former Nottingham Forest defender, Psycho, former Man City manager, and former England international. He's a fully trained electrician. He learned a trade. He actually lived in the real world. Ian Wright played in the non-league. He didn't come to professional football until he was 25. Um, that's why Ian Wright, I find, is very relatable. You can see him down the pub with his mates on a Saturday, watching it on the TV, or even going to the game on a Saturday with his friends. You know, as a fan, you can actually imagine Ian Wright in the stands as a normal fan from South London going to see Palace versus Arsenal. You can actually imagine that, the two professional clubs he played. You can imagine Ian Wright doing that. I cannot imagine a player like Dele Alli going to his local club, which would be MK Dons, hypothetically, the first professional club. I can't imagine him doing that on a Saturday. Can't. Ian Wright, I can. I can imagine Ian Wright being in the stands with his mates, maybe his kids, on a Saturday, or the grandkids because he's a grandparent. On a Saturday, 3 o'clock kickoff with his friends and family, watching Palace versus Arsenal in the Premier League or an FA Cup tie, a League Cup tie. I can imagine that. Can't imagine that with any of the current Premier League players actually going with their friends and family as a fan. Cannot imagine it because Ian Wright comes from a humble background. Stuart Pearce is a fully qualified electrician. Let that sink in. He had to go out and get a trade, and he did. I cannot imagine. I can imagine Tony Adams being in the old clock end at Arsenal watching the Gunners play. I can imagine. Cannot imagine any of the current Arsenal squad being at the Emirates as fans. Cannot. I cannot see it. I can't see it with any of the Man United. I can't see it. Um, yeah. Ryan Sidebottom's dad. The reason why Ryan Sidebottom was a cricketer is his dad encouraged him to play cricket. He has also been voted the worst. Ryan Sidebottom's dad played for Halifax and Man United as a centre back. He has been voted the worst centre back of all time in the Football League. So that's anything. Steve Harmison, for example, I think actually is now a footballing coach, by the way. But yeah, no, they you have the apprenticeship, as it was known, the footballing apprenticeship, where the young youth team players would clean the senior players' boots, help out with the groundskeeping staff, help out in the club shop. Um, yeah, I can't relate to any current players right now. Maybe Jamie Vardy when he first went to Leicester had a push because he had worked as I think a scaffold only worked in a factory. Grant Holt I can relate to. I can see Grant Holt, going to on the terraces. Yeah, at 21 he was. Arnold Sidebottom, that's the one. That's Ryan Sidebottom, Sexual Chocolate's dad. I've done a video on Ryan Sidebottom, the cricketer, which is in my cricket playlist. The career of Ryan Sidebottom, Sexual Chocolate is his nickname. Yes, he has been. Arnold Sidebottom has been voted the worst centre back in Football League history. And he also played for Halifax Town, quite famously, and has been voted the worst. I think Harry Maguire could give him a good go for his money right now. But yes, voted the worst centre back in history. But no, I mean, and until I think the 80s, rugby league players generally, while they were classed as professional because they were paid for their rugby league exploits, a lot of them had trades, which is one of the reasons why rugby league split from rugby union and became, they were compensated for their efforts, and that continued until 30 odd years ago. A lot of the players, especially if you watch some of the 80s NRL footage, or what was the New South Wales Rugby League at the time, they'll have the players, age, the club, let's say Parramatta, for example, they were quite a dominant side in the 80s, and his other profession, student, builder, journalist, plumber, truck driver, and it would actually say what his other job would have been. I don't know, personal trainer, waiter. Yeah, there have been waiters who played in the all sorts of things, right? And when they're playing like reserve grade or what was the Panasonic Cup, which is sort of like a reserve grade kind of competition. They're under 20s and things like that. A lot of them had jobs because they weren't guaranteed to have lengthy careers. It's a brutal sport. Injury can take you out like that. And they had their non-footballing career listed for the advanced stats manager. Fast forward till now, one of those players from the late 80s, Paul Kent, now one of the most recognisable Australian sports journalists. He played one game at first grade for the Parramatta Eels in 1989. One game, so he was a professional. He played for like reserve grade and what was Um, you know, you know, uh, uh, what would you class as reserve grade or the semi-pro ranks, waiting for the call up. Never got the call up. He only had played the one game, but he was a trainee journalist. He was an apprentice journalist. He's now quite a good journalist, in my opinion, as sports journos go. Um, and he was guaranteed more money writing for the local rag than playing rugby league. He could make more money. Um, there you go. Ben Foster, yeah, yeah. I would say so. Rugby league, rugby union players post retirement, if they don't stay within the game in coaching or in punditry or in a administrative capacity, a lot of them do have other qualifications so they can go into other professions. Yes, rugby union, you're very likely to have a good level of education. Felipe Contepomi, for example, is a fully qualified brain surgeon. Let that sink in. Jamie Roberts is a fully qualified cardiologist from a Wales international. Um, let that sink in. Um, so, yes, Martin Byfield was a policeman and has now gone into just television, not only in sports but also other presenting documentaries and talk shows. Martin Byfield, brilliant second row forward for England back in the day. So, yeah, rugby union, generally speaking, you're more likely to go on to, uh, if you do leave the sport, you're generally all right, rugby union. I still think they could give more support to ex-players in regards to retraining or career pathways outside of the sport. I do believe that. Yes, several players, high-profile rugby union players, who've been internationals have got into the medical profession. That is a well-known trend um, within rugby union. Some have become lawyers. Some have become very good administrators within the sport, but not in a playing capacity or coaching capacity. Very, very good admin, um, uh, and um, and have done very, very well on the administration side and governance side, be it at a domestic level or at the international level. Um, yeah, Wade Dooley and Dean Richards. Yeah. I forget what Brian Moore did before he played rugby union. Um, the Underwood brothers were in the RAF as reservists. Rory and Nick Underwood. I'm trying to think. There's been a couple of ex-army as well. But no, rugby union historically were amateur until 1995. In theory, you should have had another career and be playing for free. That basically wasn't happening from the late 80s to the mid 90s. There were loads of clubs clearly breaching the not the rules over the amateur status of the sport. So they basically just gave up and made it professional in the end. But there were a lot of I think Andrea Lo Cicero, when he first started playing for in Italian rugby, was a soldier because rugby is not very popular in the island of Sicily. I know Carlo Canna used to be a Carabinieri military policeman when he got his first call up to the Italian squad. He was a reservist police officer. Um, Talking about police officers, there they go down my road right now to the local traveller site. What a surprise! Um, but I cannot imagine Brian Moore as a lawyer. I can, but I can't. I'm surprised he hasn't, you know, continued with that because he's got Queen's Counsel. Go back into law practice. He's never been debarred, as far as I'm aware. Lord Coe, Seb Coe, He's become a member of Parliament, and now he's in the House of Lords as a crossbench. Although he was a Conservative MP for 7 years, not very good MP, mind, he was pretty hopeless. Um, he's one who stands out. Samin Campbell, he was a former leader of the Lib Dems. He was an Olympian, and obviously a long-standing MP for a very, very long time. Um, not that many of you would be interested in British politics. Yeah, Imran Khan, cricket. Yep, yep, that is a well-known one. George Weah, Liberian football player, who played for AC Milan and Man City, now president of Liberia. Manny Pacquiao has tried to run for president of the Philippines. Um, there's been some, yeah, there's been some, absolutely. Um, I can't remember. I think one of the Australian prime ministers used to play rugby league as well, historically. I can't remember which one, but one of them did actually play a bit of rugby league for a little bit. Weird, that, isn't it? But no, it is what it is. Bill Clinton. I can't remember. I can't remember what it was, Bill Clinton or someone else. Um, Obviously, Arnold Schwarzenegger was an actor before getting into politics, but he could never become Arnold Schwarzenegger could never become U.S. president because he wasn't born in the U.S. He was born in Austria. You have to be born in the U.S. to actually become U.S. president. It's in the Constitution. It's stupid. Whereas several Australian prime ministers have been born in the UK. Julia Gillard, for example, former Labour prime minister, was born in Wales. You could argue, yes, bodybuilding is classed as a sport, yes, and Arnold Schwarzenegger, yeah, was a world championship winning bodybuilder, so you could argue that. Um, that I would argue is a fair point. Yeah, yeah. Hang on one second. Ugh, just my next door neighbour, so I've got to kind of jimmy off in 5 minutes. I am gonna obviously have to love you and leave you. My neighbour wants to talk about something he's going through a lot right now, and I will leave on this note. Obviously, unfortunately, I'm going to say this: I've lost one friend to a heart attack, lost one friend to cancer, and I've lost one friend to suicide in the space of 2 months. So, and we've obviously lost Paul Green, the rugby league player, ex-player, and coach, again to suicide. Mental health and physical health, especially with men, and especially young men, is a very difficult topic to discuss. And unfortunately, especially with things like cancer and mental health, it doesn't get discussed. So if I'm going to leave on a note, I'm going to say this: look after your friends, and also look after yourself, um, because yeah, that's the note I'm going to leave on. My upstairs neighbour has been struggling a little bit with his health mentally lately, and I checked in on yesterday. So look after your friends, look out for each other, and if you think your friend's suffering with not just depression but any kind of health issue, support them if they're worried about going to the doctor, because the two biggest killers in men aged 18 to 34 is suicide and cancer, ironically. So my advice, my parting words are, yeah, just check in on each other, look out for each other, even if it's just to phone up to say, mate, how you doing? Do you want to come over for a bite to eat, and maybe even um, uh, how should I put it? Just watching this, for example, with your mates, or watching a bit of sport, watching a film, anything like that. Just look out for your mates. Is Gary Neville involved in politics, or is he just outspoken? Gary Neville, much like Rashford, I'm going to finish on this, did a lot during the pandemic, key workers and vulnerable people, like kids, with Rashford helping out with the free school meals and supporting food banks, firstly in Greater Manchester and then further afield. Gary Neville and his brother Phil own a chain of hotels with some of their ex teammates from the class of '92. and they opened up all 9 of their hotels, I believe, to key workers when they were rotating on and off, like nurses, doctors, to care workers, to bin men, to police officers, to so firemen and women. Um, they allowed key workers, if they were exhausted after a shift, to come and use their facilities for free, while you know um, they could, and offering their businesses discounted meals, like truck drivers, things like that. I do believe he is very outspoken. I don't agree with everything that Gary Neville says. I really don't. Um, but some of his viewpoints are bang on. But I don't agree with everything he says. I will admit. Sometimes he does come out with something I'm left scratching my head. I'd rather have Roy Keane for prime minister, to be honest, because I think he would sort the shambles out. But anyway, I've got to go now. I've got some bits and pieces to sort out. Do appreciate the questions. A bit more of a grumpy live stream for me this evening. There's a lot of things that every time I look at sports headlines at the moment, 9 times out of 10, negative headlines, things where sport can definitely be a leader for change socially, a positive social influence, and they're lagging behind. Um, and if you follow the AFL, just listen to what's coming out about the Adelaide Crows team building camp in 2017. It makes for pretty hard reading, and it's not for the faint of heart listening to some of the stories that are coming out about Adelaide Crows AFL team building camp in 2017. Not good. Um, and a lot of the negative stories are coming from those who've left the club in the following years, so between 2017 and now. Some have left the sport entirely, and again, harking back to mental health and looking out for each other. What happened at that training camp and that team building camp shouldn't have happened. And with mental health, the NRL, some people are pressing the NRL for a mental health round. Um, in regards to the fact that one of the South Sydney players last night received 200 death threats after the game. So let that sink in. There hasn't been a best manager since Fergie. They've all, well, even the good managers have just, yeah. If Mourinho, Van Gaal, and Ranieri are saying the same things, let that sink in. Just let that sink in. There's a lot of negativity around that club. Anyway, I'm going to go for now. Thank you very much for watching. I'll have some more content for you very, very soon.